Hello everyone and welcome back to JB's Total Gaming, where today we're going to be taking a look at the Lyonar faction for Duelyst. I haven't decided yet if I want to do any more of these videos for the other factions. Let me know if you're interested. Leave a comment if you want to see more, give a thumbs up or whatever. I'm just debating whether or not I want to do more content for this. The Lyonar faction is a group that has an interesting ability called Zeal, where they can buff the attack of units that are adjacent to your hero, and a lot of interesting provoke units. There are neutral provoke cards, but Lyonar is particularly good at that. So my opponent here started out with a low health, high attack minion, and I don't really have a fantastic way of dealing with it, so I decided to put stuff out on the board that can hopefully deal with it next turn. And my opponent's got a pretty aggressive opening, and basically I decide, let's put some bodies out. If they attack me, then I'll take some damage, but I'll still have two minions, and if they attack one of my minions, then they'll still trade. And it's a pretty interesting minion that they have there with because it's a low cost for that really high attack, and it's a little bit easier to deal with the low health. But here you see another thing that Magmar does, and this is something I do in my deck as well when I play Magmar, is buff those minions. So here's a minion that actually not just a spell, but a minion that buffs another minion. So now all of a sudden dealing with that minion is going to be a little bit trickier, because at one health I could go in with one attack creature if I was able to deal one attack with a spell, which this deck doesn't really do much of in Lyonar, but some of the factions do have a lot of stuff like that. So you see my opponent's building up a pretty dangerous board as well, so they're kind of hanging back with their minions, and like I said, I really want to find a way to deal with that. So I'm going to buff this guy up a little bit and make sure that I can deal with that minion down there. And at this point, we're still kind of trading blows, going back and forth, and this is something that I want to point out. I do here later on in the turn, and I do this later in the game too, where I swap a card out later on in the turn. If you're going to swap a card out, do it right away at the beginning of your turn so that you know what cards you have. I could say, I'm pretty new at the game or whatever, make excuses, but yeah, it's a good thing to do. If you don't have to swap a card every turn, maybe you want to keep what you have. It's a good position for the next few turns, but if you are going to swap, do it really, really early. So now my opponent's coming back up, being a little bit more aggressive, getting another one of those big creatures out, and again, I don't really have a fantastic way of dealing with it. So I could go in and move straight down with my minion, take that guy out, and then take the 2/2 out, and then just summon something. But I do have a card that at the end of my turn deals 2 damage to the minions around it. So I'm thinking, I'm debating, should I go in and clear the board and then summon something, or try to set up my opponent for next turn. And here at the last minute, it's like, you know what, never mind, we're not going to just get rid of that stuff. We're going to try to set our opponent up to get out another nice minion with a cool ability, and get out this minion that can attack twice. So it's a really nice minion, that 4/4. I really like the ability to attack twice, and then you can actually set it back a little bit further too and move it twice, and then attack once with it. It activates twice, doesn't just attack twice, which is really nice. And I'm kind of hoping that I can bait my opponent into doing exactly what my opponent does, so that I can take out both those minions just by playing a minion on my next turn, because I knew I was going to be at 6 mana and be able to play that minion. So I'm a little bit worried if they buff a minion or something like that, but they don't do it. So it was a gamble. I mean, it probably would have been the wiser move just to take those minions out, but it did work out. I'm able to play this guy, and you can see I'm pretty excited about it. I jump in right away and like, sweet, I can do this. And I could try to be aggressive and move that minion twice, but I decide, we're going to hang back a little bit, see what our opponent plays. So at this point, we've got one minion with high health and a cool ability. We've got a minion that can activate twice, and then suddenly our opponent just takes both of them out here. So this was a pretty interesting game. I thought it swung back and forth several times, which is why I wanted to show it, and I do think it shows off, at least early game. None of these decks that I have here are like high-end decks for any of the factions. It's still pretty early, but I still think it gives you an idea of the flavor of the different factions. And again, I think I only have one of the alternate heroes or whatever unlocked, but this is a game that shows off what Lyonar does well, I think, at least early on, and had some cool, interesting swings. So we're still technically a little bit ahead. We don't have a lot of cards though, but we do have a minion on the board, and then we bring another minion in, and I'm kind of hoping that we'll still be able to push our advantage here. So I don't necessarily love what I have. in my hand, but I'm thinking it was a bummer last turn. My opponent got rid of that stuff. They make it so that this guy can't counterattack, which is a pretty good move on a high health creature, and then get out to 10-10. So now all of a sudden I do not have a way of dealing with that. So those other two minions with the low health were annoying, but they weren't 10-10s. At the very least, you know, I had enough health that I could take some face damage and deal with those. But this one I can't go in and trade with. It will just wreck me. And, you know, I'm just kind of desperately searching for something to deal with it. So playing those, you know, high mana cost, high attack, high health creatures, there are quite a few of them in the game, and that can be pretty valuable, but a lot of decks have ways of dealing with them, and I don't right now. So I use this minion. I kind of like, I've won some games because of this minion that teleports somebody to a random space, gets sort of a provoke minion or something like that, and it doesn't necessarily move that guy to the best possible space for me, but it's definitely, you know, got out of the way a little bit, gave me a little bit of room, and then I can try to press in. And at this point I'm thinking, you know what, let's do as much damage as possible. Let's try to rush our opponent down so that maybe they only get off one hit with their 10-10 and we'll be able to survive. So we're kind of, you know, trying to surround the enemy hero, trying to deal as much damage as possible. And, you know, that minion not being able to counterattack was a bummer, but we can still attack with it and try to rush our opponent down. So, you know, this one I thought I was definitely way ahead on, but, you know, we're going to have to deal with this guy, and now this guy is even getting bigger, and I don't have the direct removal sort of things in my deck, and even Dispel on a 10-10, even if it's buffed up, just moving it back down to a 10-10 really isn't going to make that much big of a difference. So we're going to take a real big hit here, and I'm definitely worried. So this match that early on I felt like, you know, we had pulled our opponent into a trap, we had things in pretty good position. I'm thinking we might be done for. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get out of this one. And right here, I finally do it correctly, where I swap a card at the start of my turn, and I'm like, thank goodness. So here we saw the Zealon effect. Now we're going to see Provoke. And again, Provoke is not specifically on the Lyonar, but they do have some extra Provoke cards that are not the regular neutral ones. So basically now those minions have to find a way of dealing with that minion. They cannot move or attack while that minion is adjacent to them. So it's going to be one of those things where if our opponent has a way of dealing with that minion, we're dead. If they don't, we win. So that was one of those. It was a really nice, not top deck, I guess, because we didn't draw it for our turn, but we did swap a card to get it, and we got a card that worked out pretty well. So I knew that minion was going to die, give us some room to move away just in case if we can, and hopefully deal enough damage. Now, I debated keeping that minion alive to be kind of like another blocker in a way of our hero, but at this point I'm kind of thinking if they can deal with that Provoke, then I'm dead, and if not, we want to deal as much damage as possible so that we'll be able to deal with the enemy hero on our next turn, and that's kind of what I was hoping. So took a few gambles in this game, and at this point it's just kind of like, well, can my opponent deal with it? Can my opponent deal with it? And it ends up my opponent was not able to deal with it, did some stuff, but you know, wasn't able to get rid of it, so we're able to finish him off next turn. So I thought it was a pretty good back and forth game, showed off what Lyonar did well, and again, let me know if you're interested in seeing more of the factions for this game. It's a game that I'm really enjoying. I hope you're enjoying the videos as well. Thanks a lot for watching, and we will talk to you again soon.